Seaspray Terrace. Tonight we are going to visit a quiet stone terrace at the edge of the sea. A gentle ledge high above a row of tide pools. From up there, you can watch the ocean breathe against the rocks and see the tiny, bright creatures that live in the clear water below. The path to Seaspray Terrace begins a little way back from the cliff edge, where the land is still soft and grassy. A narrow track of packed earth leads between tufts of coastal plants, their leaves thick and waxy from years of salt spray. Small yellow flowers dot the ground like dropped buttons, and every now and then a beetle makes its slow way across the path, unhurried and steady. Wooden posts line one side of the trail, joined by a rough rope, giving you something solid to brush your hand against as you walk. The air already smells like the sea, a mix of salt, cool stone, and a faint hint of seaweed drying somewhere out of sight. As you move forward, the sound of waves grows a little clearer with each step, turning from a distant murmur into a layered rhythm of rush and retreat. There's a light breeze, gentle enough that it only lifts the ends of your hair and ruffles the fabric of your clothes. The sky is sliding slowly from pale blue into the softer colors of evening, but there is still plenty of light to see by. A few clouds hang low over the horizon, their edges catching the last traces of sun. Seaspray Terrace itself is a flat shelf of rock that juts out from the cliff like a natural balcony. Someone has added just a few human touches here, careful not to disturb too much. A simple wooden rail runs along the open edge, its posts sunk deep into the stone. The top rail worn smooth by many hands resting there over time. Near the middle of the terrace sits a sturdy bench made of weathered planks, positioned so that you can look both out to sea and down to the shore below. The rock underfoot is mostly level, with shallow grooves running through it like lines on an old drawing, filled in places with grains of pale sand. If you pause and shift your weight from one foot to the other, you can feel the solidness of the stone holding you above the water. The wind is a little cooler here, carrying tiny droplets from the waves that drift up as a light mist on your face and hands. Somewhere below, a wave hits the cliff with a hollow thump, then spreads out into a softer hiss as the water races through the gaps between rocks. Above all of it is the quiet hush of open sky. From the edge of the terrace, you have a wide view down to the tide pools that give this place its character. At the base of the cliff, the rock slopes outward in broad shelves and broken ledges, forming little basins where the sea has filled the hollows and then drawn back, leaving pockets of water behind. Each pool is like a tiny, separate world, with its own shape, depth, and colour. Some of them are round and smooth, like bowls carved into the stone. Others are long and narrow, tracing thin paths between ridges of rock, more like channels than ponds. The sunlight that is left in the sky tilts in at an angle, turning the surfaces of the pools into mirrors that flash silver when the water moves. Around the edges of each one, darker rims of wet rock mark the line where the last wave reached. In between the pools, the stone is streaked in shades of grey, brown, and soft green, with thin strands of seaweed draped over the edges like loose ribbons. You can see where the waves still slide in and out further down the slope. Too far to hear individual splashes, but close enough to watch the foam appear and vanish. If you focus on just one tide pool, your eyes start to pick out more and more details inside it. At first, the surface simply looks like plain water, faintly rippled by the small movements of the air. But when you lean a little closer, carefully holding the railing for balance, the world inside becomes sharp. Tiny snails cling to the stones on the bottom, their shells patterned in spirals of cream and brown, like small polished beads. A few small fish, no bigger than your thumb, move in short, quick bursts, stopping and starting again, as if they are hopping through the water instead of swimming. Their sides catch the light and flash silver for a second before they blend back into the mottled sand. Tufts of seagrass stand upright even in this still pocket. their thin blades waving just a little from the subtle shifting of the water. Along one edge, an anemone sits anchored to the rock, its body a simple round column with a soft ring of tentacles around its center, opening and closing slowly as if it were breathing. In another pool, you notice the brightness of very small creatures that seem to glow with their own color against the muted rock. A cluster of minute shrimp flicker in and out of the seaweed, their bodies translucent with tiny sparks of blue and green along their sides. They move so quickly that you only ever get a full look at one for a heartbeat at a time before it shoots away like a pale arrow. Near them, a pair of tiny nudibranchs inch along the stone, no larger than the nail of your little finger. One is a deep cobalt blue with thin yellow lines. The other a pale white with orange-tipped frills along its back. They move with calm precision, sliding forward in tiny, steady waves, ignoring everything else around them. When one reaches the edge of the pool, it pauses, as if to consider its path, then turns and continues, tracing a slow path across the rock. Little dots of light bounce in the water as the sinking sun catches the edges of these small bodies, making them stand out like moving jewels. A little further along the terrace, a family has stopped to look over the railing. You hear them before you see them, their voices softened by distance, and the soft cushioning effect of the open air. A child with a bright red jacket leans forward, resting their chin on folded arms over the rail, pointing down excitedly at something only they can see from their angle. An older person, perhaps a grandparent, stands behind with one steady hand on the child's shoulder, keeping them secure in that position without saying anything. The other adults stand close together, their conversation slow and relaxed, drifting in and out of the sound of the waves. One of them lifts a small pair of binoculars, adjusting the focus with careful movements, then lowers them again to allow the child to peer through. For a few minutes, they all just stand there, quietly watching the pools. And then, as if guided by some gentle signal, they move on along the path, their footsteps fading back toward the grassy land. Below the terrace, on a patch of flat rock closer to the waterline, a group of shorebirds is busy with its own careful work. A pair of small sandpipers hurry back and forth on thin legs, their bodies bobbing as they probe the wet sand at the edges of a pool with their pointed beaks. They move in loose synchrony, sometimes veering away from each other and then coming back to the same spot, apparently drawn by some invisible line of interest in the sand. A larger gull stands nearby, its white feathers bright against the darker stone. It looks outward, toward the open sea most of the time. But every now and then, it tilts its head and fixes one eye on the activity in the pool, as if checking that everything is as it should be. When a wave comes in, a little stronger than the others, and washes over the lower rock, the gull lifts gently into the air with a few slow wing beats, floats just above the foam, and then settles down again as the water drains away. If you let your attention travel across all the pools at once, you can see the changing light move over them like a slow tide of its own. The sky has deepened from blue into lavender and soft gold, with streaks of orange tracing the undersides of the clouds. Each pool captures a slightly different fragment of this sky. So some surfaces reflect pale pink, while others hold a deeper purple, depending on their angle. As the waves roll in further below, they send faint tremors up through the stone that show themselves in the tiniest ripples across the pool surfaces, gently breaking the reflections into shimmering patterns. The rocks that were bright and sharp in the full daylight take on smoother outlines now, their edges softened in the low sun. Shadows stretch out from every protrusion of stone and patch of seaweed, reaching across the water like dark fingers, until the pools seem rimmed with charcoal. The colours of the small creatures inside remain clear and bright, tiny points of contrast against the darkening floor. The air cools just a little more, and you can see the first faint star appear far above the horizon. On the very edge of one shallow pool, a hermit crab is negotiating a careful path from one patch of shelter to another. Its shell, an empty spiral it has borrowed from some long-departed snail, is patterned in cream and brown, just slightly too big for its body, so that it tilts a little to one side when it moves. Each time the crab lifts itself, you can see the small legs and claws protruding briefly from the shell's opening, gripping and releasing the stone with firm precision. It moves in a series of decisive steps, then pauses, adjusting the angle of its shell, as if making sure of its balance. Another tiny crab, smaller and wearing a darker shell, emerges from beneath a fringe of seaweed and seems to inspect the newcomer by circling halfway around it. There is no clash, only a brief moment where they appear to sense each other's presence. Then, as simply as they met, one crab retreats back under the seaweed, while the other continues its journey, disappearing finally into a deeper crevice at the pool's edge. A bit deeper in another pool, a starfish has settled itself against the rock, its 5 arms spread evenly around its center. Its surface is covered in small bumps, each one catching the light differently, so that the whole shape looks like a piece of soft, textured leather pressed onto the stone. Its color is a gentle orange, fading to paler tones at the tips of its arms. If you look very closely and give your eyes a moment to adjust, you can see that it is not entirely still. The tiny tube feet on its underside, far out of sight, are slowly flexing and releasing, holding it firmly in place against the faint tug of the water. Nearby, tucked into a shadow, something darker moves. A very small octopus, no larger than your 2 hands held together, shifts its position between 2 rocks. Its body changes color as it passes from one surface to the next, from mottled brown to a speckled pattern that matches the stone around it. One arm extends delicately to explore the underside of a rock, each sucker attaching and letting go like tiny, careful hands. After a while, it curls back on itself and settles, blending into the background so completely that if you glance away and then look back, it takes you a few seconds to find it again. Around many of the pools, long strands of seaweed have gathered, draped over rocks and trailing into the water like soft cords. Some are dark green and glossy, their surfaces smooth and cool where they touch the air. Others are a lighter, almost golden green, catching the remaining light as if they have been varnished. When the water moves, the submerged lengths sway gently, folding and unfolding in slow waves that mirror the motion of the larger sea below. In the shallowest pools, where the water is warm from the day's sun, the seaweed grows in clusters like small underwater bushes, thick and soft. Tiny snails and small, bright isopods make their way through this forest, their movements so small that they barely disturb the leaves. The rocks above the waterline are rougher, holding patches of barnacles like small, stiff buttons glued to their surface. If you ran your fingertips over them, they would feel hard and knobbly. But from up here, they form a pale speckled band around each pool, marking how high the waves sometimes rise. Behind you, on the landward side of the terrace, the slope rises gently upward to where the first low houses stand at a safe distance from the cliff. Their windows catch the evening light, glowing softly like small lanterns. A narrow road runs along the crest of the land, mostly quiet at this hour, with only the occasional passing car or bicycle. From up here, you can see a few people walking slowly along the path, some with dogs trotting at their heels, others walking alone with their hands in their pockets, heads tipped slightly down in thought. Further along the coastline, a small lighthouse stands on a more distant point of rock, its white tower clear against the darkening sea. Its light has not yet begun to flash. For now, it is just a simple shape in the fading day. The whole scene feels held between the land and sea, a narrow band where houses, road and terrace balance on the edge of the water's wide reach. As the sun slips lower, the change in light brings out another layer of the tide pool's character. The bright reflections fade a little, and the surfaces become more transparent, allowing you to see deeper into the water. Some of the tiny creatures that were hidden during the brighter hours start to appear. A few small, almost invisible shrimp emerge from under the rocks, their bodies catching what little light remains in sharp points along their edges. A cluster of minute, luminous plankton begins to gather near the surface, faintly visible as a dusting of tiny specks that brighten when the water is disturbed. When a small wave from farther down the rocks sends a slight shiver through the pool, those specks glow for a moment with a cool blue-green light, like scattered sparks that vanish as quickly as they appear. Each pool seems to have its own rhythm of these soft flickers, quietly pulsing in response to the movement around them. The air has grown cooler now, and you might pull your sleeves down or fold your arms loosely across your chest as you continue to lean on the railing. The sound of the waves remains steady, a slow, repeating pattern of rise and fall. When a larger wave comes in, you can see it gather itself out beyond the rocks, lifting the surface into a smooth, dark swell. It rolls inward and breaks against the outer ledges, sending fans of white foam up into the air that drift and then slide back down the ways they came. Some of the spray reaches high enough that a fine mist reaches your face, dotting your skin with tiny droplets that quickly cool and vanish. Between these larger waves, smaller ones slip quietly through the gaps in the rocks, feeding and refreshing the tide pools drop by drop. You can almost trace the path of each one, watching how the water moves from pool to pool in a chain, keeping everything below alive and connected to the sea. On the terrace, you sit down on the bench for a while, letting the solid wood take your weight. The plank surface is cool but not cold, with a slight roughness where knots in the wood have worn down differently from the rest. If you place your hands beside you, palms flat, you can feel the faint vibration of distant waves run through the structure, a gentle reminder of the water below. Your feet rest on the stone, and you may shift them a little to find a comfortable angle, hearing the soft scrape of sole against rock. The wind brushes past your ears, steady and low, bringing with it the sound of the sea, and a hint of distant voices carried from somewhere along the shore. Above, the sky has deepened to a rich blue, and more stars have begun to appear, spaced out at first, and then gradually filling in the darker spaces between. The first pale glow of the lighthouse begins to rotate, sending a slow, repeating beam far out across the water. Down in the tide pools, the bright creatures are beginning to settle for the night in their own ways. The anemones close their tentacles a little, pulling them inward until they look like soft, rounded buttons on the rock. The tiny fish retreat under ledges and into cracks in the stone, their silver sides no longer flashing as they find places where they can rest without being seen. The shrimp and nudibranchs move more slowly now, their paths shorter, their motions less frequent as they tuck themselves into sheltered spots among seaweed and stone. The hermit crabs that were busy crossing open spaces earlier have found comfortable hollows and pulled back into their shells, leaving only a small opening facing outward, ready but relaxed. Even the small octopus has shifted deeper into its hiding place, its colour blending entirely with the rock around it, so that it merges into the darkness.